Hey there everybody, Scotia here, and welcome to a new chapter review for the latest chapter of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 9, the JoJoLands. So, it's been a while both for me and for JoJo. It was on hiatus last month, and I've practically been on hiatus for I don't know how long, however long it's been since my last video to this video. Hopefully, if I plan it right, there will be other videos on the channel. I'm kind of like planning to drop, certain videos before this one. It's kind of like my return to the channel. So hopefully, that's worked out, and hopefully, doing those other videos hasn't delayed this video to the point where chapter 10 is already out, and the two reviews are clashing for this one and that one. So hopefully this review isn't clashing with the release of the next chapter and the review for that chapter. But yeah, I'm pretty excited. Obviously, the first hiatus of part 9 JoJoLands, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Up until a couple of days before this chapter came out, I was really desperate for it. I was so I need to read it. But yeah, the last chapter was pretty decent from what I remember about it. It was kind of like a kind of slower chapter where it was more kind of like ending and kind of like the calm after the climax of the previous chapter, which was the end of the fight with the cats. And then kind of like the build up into what is now the start of this new fight. But yeah, I think overall it delivered, but we'll get into that in a minute. So without further ado, let's get into the review for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 9, the JoJoLands, Chapter 9, The Owner of the Lava Rock. So we start this chapter with, I actually wasn't expecting it to, start with this. I thought we would kind of pick up almost immediately after the end of the previous chapter, but we start with honestly a pretty cute conversation between Jodio and his mother Barbara Ann. This is her first appearance since chapter 2, which was I think March that chapter came out. So it's been a few months since we've last seen her, so it's nice to see her back again. But basically, obviously Jodio and Paco are in this situation that is rapidly getting worse and worse. There is an enemy stand user somewhere in their vicinity. They have they have made their presence known by killing the cats and presenting the heads of the cats kind of like mafia style. That's relevant for later. And obviously his mother doesn't know that, and she's calling Jodio hey, what do you want for dinner? I can't get into touch with Dragona, what's going on? And then Jodio's kind of yeah, just pick whatever burrito, it's fine, just kind of a bit busy here. Very interesting line actually in this, where Barbara Ann says something along the lines of I don't want you hanging around with Paco, he went to, I heard he went to jail for a year. So they're still kind of playing up this year-long absence that Paco had, where he kind of disappeared for a year and nobody really knows what he was doing. Some say he was in jail, some say he was this. As the chapters go on, I get less and less confident in the theory, but part of me, I think, is still kind of leaning towards the Paco is a rock human theory. But we'll see how it goes. But they're still playing up on that. But yeah, I really like this conversation between Jodio and Barbara Ann. It kind of really reminds me of Holly and Jotaro at the start of part 3 in their relationship, where Holly was really caring and loving towards Jotaro, and Jotaro just didn't really give a shit. But he did. It was that kind of cool guy act that Jotaro was kind of giving off. But he did care about her. I get a kind of similar thing here, not one to one, because I think Jodio, obviously, as he said in earlier chapters, he absolutely, he does love his mother dearly, and is absolutely, willing to risk his life to protect her and do all sorts of things, to make sure that she's safe and protected and looked after. So I don't think there's that kind of reluctance, but there is a little bit in the sense of Jodio is reluctant to kind of talk much because he's in this situation where it's life or death. He doesn't know what's going on. But yeah, either way, it was really nice. I really enjoyed the conversation. I thought it was cute, the back and forth between them, and the care that Barbara Ann has for her children. I think is really it's just really neat, because we don't often really have JoJo mothers or parents. But yeah, just really nice to see Barbara Ann again. I hope we get more screen time with her. So once the phone call is over with and Jodio hangs up, him and Paco basically just scouting the area around them, trying to find where the stand user is. And then Paco suddenly has this kind of spiel with Jodio, where he's kind of trying to convince Jodio to just hand the lava rock over and just be hey, this guy, the owner of the cats, clearly just wants the rock and nothing else. I say we give it to him, we were only told to get the diamond, let's just give him the rock and go. And obviously this the ending of this chapter recontextualizes everything that Paco says here, but we'll get to that in a bit. But at the time when I was reading this for the first time, I was like, man, Paco, like, when did you become like a pussy? You know, like that kind of thing. I was just like, man, you just suddenly become like a raging coward, which is really unlike you. But it was kind of like, I didn't think there was anything off with it. I just thought, you know, it kind of fit at the same time of like, obviously Paco's, you know, he's a tough guy, he's willing to do these things, but, you know, I kind of got the feeling at the time he was like, oh, you know, he knows when he's out of his depth, or he knows that, you know, this is a lot serious than kind of like stuff they've had to deal with in the past. So I thought it was an interesting kind of turn from Paco here. I didn't like it in the sense of like, you know, there's no point just, you know, going the coward's way out, or, you know, just bowing down and backing down and giving this guy whatever he wants. But there's an interesting line here that we'll get back to later, where Paco starts kind of describing this stand user, this enemy, this owner of the cats, and kind of goes on this thing of like, oh no, like somebody who's done this, like they're lower than the mafia. Like he says like they're probably from the mafia, which is very interesting why the mafia suddenly gets brought up, but again, we'll get to it. But he's like, no, this person isn't in the mafia, they can't be like, they're lower than that. You know, they're making a threat that, you know, they're letting us know they have no moral code. The cats, you know, they owned the cats, but they have no bond with the cats. They were willing to sacrifice the cats to send a warning like it was nothing, like this person is very dangerous. And then it's a lot of back and forth, and then Jodio is, you know, thinking a lot, and he remembers a map that Rohan had when Jodio picked up the lava rock back in like way chapters ago when they were fighting Rohan in the holiday villa. Jodio, you know, saw a map, and he has a brief like flash of this map, and he says this map is kind of, it basically looks like it's on a volcano of sorts. There's an X mark on it, and it looks like a place I think Jodio thinks could be the origin of the lava rock. And I was going to mention this at the end, but I'll mention this now. A couple of days after I read this chapter, because I'm recording this a couple of days after the chapter came out, but, you know, that kind of doesn't matter. I had a random thought of, like, back in chapter 1, the second page of chapter 1 is a shot of Dragona and Jodio on a boat, and they're sailing towards a volcano that's, you know, erupting or something like that. And I kind of thought, you know, obviously there's always every chance that this is just, it's not an actual thing that's going to happen in the story. It's something that, you know, is just a metaphorical kind of thing that Araki is trying to express, or a kind of a hype page to keep people invested. But I thought, you know, like, if this is a thing that is going to happen in the story, like, we've still not gotten to that part yet. Like, that's, like, if that ends up being like a flash forward of sorts, you know, that's something that hasn't happened yet. And I saw the map on the volcano, and I thought, oh, I thought of this. I thought, oh, like, we still might not even be like at a point where like the story's really going yet. Like, we might still be like really early, even though we're like 9 chapters in. And I don't know, I thought it was cool. It got me really interested. One thing I did notice though is that if that is a flash forward, there's no Paco or Usagi in the boat with Jodio and Dragona. Obviously that could have just been a thing of like Araki being like, oh, you know, I hadn't introduced them yet, so, you know, there's no need to have them there. But, you know, it'd be interesting, but also kind of a shame if the group splits up at some point in the near future to go investigate this rock. But yeah, that was just something I just had a random thought of when I was thinking about this chapter a couple of days after I read it. I was like, oh, that's interesting, you know, that'd be interesting if that ends up being a thing, and like this is kind of, this random flash of the map is the start of like that journey that leads to that moment where Jodio and Dragona, you know, are on a boat sailing to a active erupting volcano. So something to think about, I think, in case the plot ends up going there. So Paco was still like, you know, we need to just give up, we need to, you know, move on and just give the guy the lava rock and just go back with the diamond, because that's all we asked for. And Jodio has like an actual, like, really, like, honest to goodness, a really good speech here. He has a really good motivational kind of moment where he just says to Paco, like, you need to just make up your mind, like, you can't go back and forth, like, in times like this you need to make a choice and just stick with it, or else you can't move forward. And I don't know, I just really liked it. I thought it was a really good speech from Jodio, and just made me think, like, more than anything, in a group where everyone else is older than him, he honestly at times feels like the most mature. Obviously plenty of times where he's immature, but, you know, in the grand scheme of things, I do think he has, you know, his shit together the most out of everybody. I think everyone else in the group has some kind of, not issue or anything that really, you know, but like drags him down or stuff like that. But it's kind of like, you know, I think the best way I can kind of feel like I can describe it is like, in a situation where everybody runs, I feel like Jodio is the only one in the group at the moment who would stand their ground. And I expect that to change, of course. I expect the others to end up, you know, getting to that level where they don't back down. Obviously, we're still very early doors yet in terms of like where we are in the plot and everybody's kind of like feelings in the overall story. Like, we still don't even really know where the plot is going, or like the main kind of like premise that kind of like motivates everybody to go along with it. Like, obviously in JoJolian, pretty early it was established that the main kind of driving force was going to be finding out who Josuke is. And in part 7 you knew, obviously I think part 7 came earlier, but it was still kind of like the basic premise of like, this is kind of like what is going to drive us forward, for at least for now. You know, it was the steel ball run, it was winning the race. And yeah, I don't think we've really got to that point in JoJoLands yet. I think we're really close. I think we're just about nearly there. I think in the next couple chapters we will get to that point where we know, like, okay, this is what the main kind of like thing that drives us forward is. At the moment it's literally just like the lava rock. You know, it's just, what is this lava rock? I think maybe once we get back to the main island and we give the diamond back to Meryl, I think that might be where the plot finally starts to move. Like, maybe Meryl betrays them or something like that. But for now, I think, you know, I think we're still early. We're still kind of like not aimless. I don't think aimless is the right word. I would use the word aimless for a lot of JoJolian, especially in the later parts, where you kind of had that feeling that even Araki didn't really know where things were going. I definitely think there's a point to a lot of things. I definitely think things are moving in a direction. It's just we as the readers don't know what that direction is yet. But at the moment it does seem a bit kind of like, you know, when we're not fully there yet. So yeah, that tangent aside, basically what I mean is, like, to me it makes sense that Paco is like, he's not motivated enough at this point to kind of be like, yeah, no, fuck that guy, we're not giving him it. You know, it would make sense for him to be like, hey, you know, I value my life, you know, I don't want to risk this. This guy is clearly, you know, has no moral compass. He's willing to do anything to, you know, get what he wants, and if he just wants the lava rock, then just give it to him. But no, Jojo's like, no, like, I'm not giving it. And he has this, at the end of the speech, he has a really cool panel here where he goes, you know, I promised Rohan Sensei, like, I promised Rohan that I would destroy the lava rock if I couldn't hold on to it, you know. And I think that's a very good thing for Jodio, to keep him motivated. Like, this is Jodio's motivation for now, even if he doesn't know a single thing about what's going on, or the nature of the rock, or what it means, or what it does. Jodio is going to see this through to the end, purely because, you know, he made that promise to Rohan. And it's just really great stuff. I really like Jodio a lot. I feel like I'm kind of split in a way of like, I feel like my brain wants to be like, oh, Paco's my favourite, or Dragona's my favourite, or Usagi's my favourite, when they have really cool moments. But then I loop back around to like, no, Jodio is still my favourite character so far in part 9. I just love everything about him. I think he's just such an interesting character, such a great character. He's already had so many amazing moments. And it's funny because I didn't really know what to expect from him when this part first started. I didn't have any expectations. I was just like, we'll see how it goes. And then people started saying he was, you know, oh, he's clearly a Giorno, kind of like, you know, an alternate universe version Giorno. And that may be the case, but I think he's far more interesting than Giorno ever was. I think he's far more interesting than, you know, a couple of the other JoJos. I like Josuke Part 8 a lot, but I think he's way better than Josuke Part 8 at this point. We'll see how that changes, because, you know, like I said, I did like Josuke Part 8, and he had really, really cool moments, especially, you know, near the end of JoJolian, and, you know, like, peppered throughout. But I think so far, just, you know, 9 chapters in, I'm way more invested in Jodio. I'm way more invested in what he does, the way he thinks, the way he acts about things. I'm way more invested in that than a lot of the other JoJos that I was at this point. I think, for this early, I think, like, Jolene and Joseph, I think were the only ones where I was really like, yeah, like, I'm on board with this character, like almost this early. Like, yeah, I get what they're doing. I get their thing, I get what makes them unique, what kind of drives them. That's enough for me to get invested. The other JoJos took me a while. I remember, like, Jotaro took me to, like, I think it was, like, the Derby fight, the first one, with when he was betting the souls of everybody. That was kind of like when I started kind of like, okay, I get Jotaro now, like, I'm starting to kind of get with him and like him. So that took me a long time. Josuke took me a bit earlier, Part 4 Josuke. Didn't take me too long. I could go on about the other JoJos, but yeah, no, it's rare. Like, it's one of the few JoJos where I'm like, I'm this early, and I'm like, yeah, like, I get this guy, I'm fully on board, just, you know, can't wait to see more of him. But yeah, just a really, really great conversation from Jodio here, just great stuff here. We then cut back to Dragona and Usagi in the Diamoch watch sales room, where they are currently, you know, being investigated because it appears that one of them has stolen one of the watches that they were, you know, that they were looking at the end of the previous chapter. And I'll be blunt, I'm kind of gonna like speed run through this part, not because I didn't like it, but because it's just, I don't really have that much to say for the most part. because this ended up being mostly like a comedy bit, which I don't mind, but I was way more invested in the Jodio and Paco side of things of this chapter, so I'll kind of just brush through it a bit. So Dragona and Usagi are being like essentially strip searched, they're emptying their bag of everything. It's quite funny because Usagi has like a bunch of shit that he stole from Rohan's house, which was funny, but there's no watch and nobody can find it. The salesmen are like searching the couch. They start, grabbing Dragona and kind of like not fondling, not like the cop, but they get a bit handsy and kind of get a bit kind of thorough with the searching of Dragona, which is like of course typical. So actually, I will say this really cool moments here. I really am starting to like the dynamic between Dragona and Usagi. I think I probably mentioned it in other ones, but like I thought their dynamic was fun, but like this one I really like because Dragona is just kind of like starts getting in their faces like, hey, you can't do this, you have no proof we stole it, blah 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 blah, like just getting in their faces, shouting at them, and then Usagi's kind of like the hype man who's just kind of like, yeah, you can't do that, like just repeating everything Dragona says. And there's a really funny panel here where Dragona and Usagi are like posing, and obviously JoJo posing, but like it's just so funny. It's like Dragona pointing, being like, oh, you're the ones that are claiming, this, and yeah, and Usagi's just doing the pose, like, yeah, we don't know shit about this. It was really funny. I just really enjoyed a lot of their dynamic in this chapter. It's really funny. So eventually, the salesman gets out the camera footage and shows it to the two. And at first, it looks like there's no evidence or stuff like that of showing any of them taking the watch. But then they zoom in on a different angle, and then they see that it seems like Dragona tucked the watch under their bracelet. And then, of course, Dragona is just flabbergasted because they're like, I didn't do it, I didn't take it, what's going on? And then they look down and they see that the watch is actually currently in their pocket. On top of the lava rock, and they're just really confused. But then they look down again and they see that smooth operators are actually the ones moving the bracelet, and that just confuses Dragona even more because they're like, I didn't tell smooth operators to do that, what's going on? And then they kind of have a realization of like, oh, like, was everything that's been going wrong with the diamond in the villa, like, was that me? Like, did smooth operators move the diamond, like keep moving the diamond around, like during all that time in the earlier chapters when someone would grab onto the diamond and then they would turn around and look back and then the diamond would be somewhere else? Like, was that also Dragona doing that subconsciously? So it's a very interesting thing being posited here. Hilarity then ensues as the watch starts flying all over the place once Usagi notices that it is now somehow on the salesman's shoe, and basically the salesman and the security guard start just running away and chasing the watch as it just flies about the shop floor, and that's pretty much the end of them. And in some ways I'm kind of a bit disappointed, but I'm also relieved. I didn't want this to go on for another chapter. Like, I was invested, but I didn't care too much about this whole thing of Dragona and Usagi being interrogated about this watch. But I think ending it kind of like this, I don't know, felt a bit kind of weak to me. Like, just very convenient and kind of like, oh, it worked out perfectly. It kind of reminds me a lot of, in part 4, when Josuke, Okuyasu, and Shigechi try to cash in the lottery ticket. There's a bunch of, it's a very similar thing. It's almost like, now that I think about it, it's almost like nearly, not one-to-one, but it's very, very similar. Where it's, two people locked in a room with a guy who doesn't trust them, who is adamant that they've done a crime, that they've stolen something. And, obviously with that one, it was Josuke and the others were kind of like using their stands to kind of like hoodwink and shift things around so that it seemed like they were the ones who owned the lottery ticket. Obviously, I don't think Dragona and Usagi were using their stands here. Well, I think Dragona was, but subconsciously by the looks of it. But yeah, I don't know, it just felt kind of really convenient. Just like, oh, it ends up, because it was like, they have the footage that this watch was on, like, it absolutely looks like that Dragona, tucked the watch into their bracelet, and, and then ends up in their pocket, and then ends up on the salesman's shoe, and then it flies away. So, like, it went somewhere, and they have footage that it was at least at one point on Dragona, and then it flies across the floor, and they pick it up, and then they're suddenly, like, crying, apologizing, like, oh, we didn't mean to do this, sorry, it just felt very weird to me. It felt a bit rushed, it felt like a couple more pages on this, but I don't know, I think even the way it went down, I think was just very kind of convoluted and just a bit, yeah, I don't know, this whole thing didn't really do much for me. This whole kind of like mini storyline of the salesman and the watch, it didn't really do much for me. I think it was mainly done as kind of like a kind of cliffhanger for the hiatus. Obviously, I don't think it was done pure, like I don't think Araki wrote it like, oh, I'm going to do a hiatus this month, and do stuff like that. But I don't know, I didn't really care for this. I liked Dragona and Usagi in it. I thought their side of it, the way they acted in their things, like I was talking about earlier with the panels, I thought that was great. Just the whole thing and the salesman side of it, I just didn't really care for it, unfortunately. But, we get some good things here from Dragona at the end, kind of a good internal monologue, where they start wondering, like, what is going on with this lava rock? Like, what is the nature of the lava rock? And kind of thinking, like, is this lava rock, is it controlling stands? Like, is the power of this lava rock able to, subconsciously, like, make people use their stands in ways that draws it together? I don't know. There's a lot to go on here. Obviously, I've seen people kind of be like, oh, they retconned the rock already. They didn't. This is more a thing of, like, this is the power of the lava rock, being established a bit more. Like, we've gotten a bit more of an idea of how the lava rock works. I'm not really going to go into it now, because I think I need to reread this chapter a bit more, a couple more times, to kind of, like, fully get the, like, what it's kind of insinuating here. But it's very interesting from what I can gather already, that, what this lava rock can do. I think it's a very interesting object, and I'm definitely interested in seeing where it goes and the truth behind it. If I had to take a guess, I would say at the moment, the lava rock is probably related to the Saint's Corpse in some way, because the walleyes in part 8 were, hinted to be, somehow related to the Saint's Corpse. I think when Johnny took it over to heal his son in part 8. Maybe something similar is happening here, because we've not had an explanation yet as to how, all 4 of these people have stands. Like, we don't know how, Jodio got a stand, how Dragona and Paco and Usagi, like, we don't know how they got stands yet, because in the new universe, you get stands from the Saint's Corpse, and, from, I think, was it Devil's Point? I can't remember. I think it was Devil's Point, the point where, like, everybody got their stands in the desert, like Mountain Tim and Funny Valentine got their stands in the desert, and where Johnny got Tusk. But yeah, very interesting stuff. Like I said, I think it's something that we were not really going to get a clear idea on until way later, but I think it's very interesting stuff here being established. So, this whole arc was worth it, I guess, for that, for this kind of, that revelation and kind of the questions being pondered here. But overall, yeah, I just was not a fan of this, really. I felt it was kind of just not pointless, but it just kind of, for how quickly and kind of lame it ended, I was, I just wasn't a fan. Then we finally get to the end of the chapter here, as Paco and Jodio are still scouting the area, trying to look for where, this enemy stand user is. And then all of a sudden, Paco puts a tray down on a table behind Jodio, and starts going on about, oh yeah, like, sorry I was gone for so long, I had to go to, like, another food court on the other side of the airport. They didn't have any chicken, so I got this other food. And then Jodio is like, I love the shots of Jodio here where he's just like, his eyes are wide and he's just like, what the fuck? And then he turns around. And I was confused for a second here, actually, before we get to the turning around part. Because I thought, like, what happened here was I thought that the lava rock was messing with Paco now. And, like, Paco was starting to, like, do stuff without really thinking about it. He went from, like, being on guard to, like, oh, I'm just going to start eating my food. But then he's talking about, like, oh, I was gone for a while. And I thought, well, that's weird. And then Jodio turns around, and there's 2 Pacos. And, Paco's, like, noticing that Jodio's not, responding to him. And then Jodio, fully turns around, and we get the reveal that the Paco, not only this entire chapter, but the ending of the previous chapter, wasn't the real Paco. It was the enemy stand user. It was the owner of the cats. And I loved this reveal. Because of the thing of, like, I didn't know. I didn't think, like, not a single thing from the end of the last chapter, everything Paco said, at the time I read it, nothing stood out as being weird or off. But I've gone back and I've read this chapter since, and when you look at, like, the way Paco reacts to stuff, like, when Jodio says, like, no, I'm not going to give the lava rock to the guy, it's not his, I promised to Rohan, the way Paco reacts, it's like he's pissed. Like, he's pissed off, like, what? Like, you're not going to do it? And at the time, it didn't stand out as being weird. But you go back and you notice, like, no, like, it is weird. Like, why would Paco be mad about that? And then you think about it more, it's like, wait, why would Paco, like, be so determined, like, no, we should absolutely give up. We should absolutely just give the lava rock to the guy. It's, it seemed a bit weird. And then you get this reveal, and it's so amazing. I'm pretty sure this guy's a rock human, because the way his skin is flaking off here, it's very rock-like. Obviously, it looks like rock chips, and I've seen people make the meme 100 times already. I don't think it's Wu. I don't think it's Wu Tomoki from Part 8. I think that'd be dumb if it was Wu. Because that's not even his stand. Like, he's not even like a mimic. His stand and let him mimic people. it just let him like disintegrate and fall into rock. Like, I admit, it's fully similar. Like, the way that his whole skin chips off is very similar to, you know, the way Doctor Wu, the stand, worked near the end of Part 8. But like, I just don't think it's Wu. I know I'm seeing more and more people think like, oh, is Doctor, you know, is Wu back? And I'm like, no, like I really, really don't think it is. I don't know, that's the type of thing I don't like about kind of like JoJo fans, is like their inability to accept that parts while linked are separate. Like, we don't have to always, like, not everything has to be like linked to this part. Like, I've seen people say that they think this stand user is, you know, an alternate universe Zucchero from like one of the early fights in Part 5, which is fucking stupid. Like, I'm sorry, but like, I know there's a lot of Part 5 like homages and things kind of playing around with here, but it's not. This isn't a remake of Part 5. Like, we're not doing the same thing. Like, people literally counting it like, oh, in chapter 18 of Part 5 they fought Zucchero, and we're on chapter 9, and, you know, pages of JOJOLands are worth 2 of, you know, Vento Herrero. So, you know, and it's like, no, like, this isn't Part 5. This is Part 9. It's doing something different, and it's like, just let it be something different. It's not Wu Tomoki. It's not Zucchero. Like, it's whoever the stand user ends up being. But yeah, that's like a mini rant aside. But no, this was a great reveal. I loved it. And then we get my favorite page or panel here, where you get the close up of, you know, the layer of skin kind of falling off. And it's interesting how this kind of stand looks like it works, because it seems like the user is hiding underneath the layer of skin, and it looks like he hides objects underneath it, because the final kind of pages we get here is a knife like comes out of the skin as well, and the guy uses it to kind of like slice Jodio's throat, and that's where the chapter ends. I'm not too worried for Jodio here. I expect it in the next chapter, like the first page of the next chapter is going to reveal that it's not that bad. It's like a small nick, like Jodio was able to back away in time, and he just slightly cut his throat, because I mean, we don't have a healing stand in this group yet, so I don't think like a thing like that, like, you know, cutting a throat, that, because it looks like it's fairly deep, you know, it's kind of, you know, a zoomed out shot at the end here. But yeah, I think in the next chapter it'll be very minute, like it'll be a very, you know, surface level scratch or wound that just causes a bit of blood. But yeah, and that's where the chapter ends, and I'm like, I can't wait for the next chapter. Like, I want to see where this goes now. But yeah, finally got our first real stand, like our first real enemy stand user. Rohan, I guess, does count, but Rohan is Rohan. I think we knew he wasn't going to be evil or an enemy like that. That was more of kind of like two neutral forces clashing. This is definitely more like, no, this is an enemy, and I think this is going to be the bridge into the overall enemy group. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where it's like, reading this and then getting the reveal and then going back to read what Paco says is very telling, because if you read it under the guise of like, this is the enemy stand user describing himself, it's not Paco talking about him, it's him talking about himself, and him going on about like, oh, this is someone from the Mafia, this is someone who, you know, doesn't have a moral code. He doesn't care about societal norms. He was the owner of the cats, but didn't hesitate to kill them. You know, he's the lowest of the low. He's lower than the Mafia. He's a scumbag. He's a murderer. He's a piece of shit. And it's like, he's talking about himself, and like, you realize everything he was doing in this chapter was done to convince Jodio to give up the rock. And, you know, Jodio stood his ground. Like I said earlier, Jodio is the one, like, is the worst person in the group to kind of try and do that to, is like trying to convince Jodio to not do it, was fruitless, because Jodio is the only person in the group, I believe, at this point, who wouldn't give up the rock. And obviously Jodio stood his ground, and now the guy's like, okay, you're not going to give me the rock, so now I'm going to have to kill you all. And then this is where we get to. So yeah, very interesting. I'm kind of interested in seeing how this fight actually plays out from here, because unless this stand has like another kind of like sub ability that is more kind of like offense based, because this is like, at the moment it very much seems like a mimic stand, like it lets the user, you know, mimic the appearance of people. Actually, there's a good theory I saw on Reddit where someone was kind of like, oh, maybe the stand like doesn't like maybe this like mimic stand stops working when the other person comes close, because this guy was fine the entire time, but then as soon as Paco showed up, like, it is the whole thing, all the rocks and the skin started like chipping away. So I think that's pretty on the nose. I think that makes a lot of sense, that like this disguise only works while the person it's mimicking is like far away. But yeah, it's really cool stuff. But I am interested in seeing how this fight works out. Obviously, he has a knife, so, you know, the knife will only really get him so far. But yeah, super pumped for what is like probably our first actual like real fight. Obviously we had the cats as well, but the cats was a weird one. That was more of like that was kind of more of a situational stand fight where you couldn't really directly attack the stand or the enemy. It was more like, you know, strings and stuff that you had to kind of like figure out a way to kind of that was kind of like more mind games. This one I think will have to be more physical based because like A, he has a knife, and B, you can't like, obviously there'll be mind game stuff involved, but like you will have to more than likely knock this guy out in order to defeat him. But yeah, just interesting stuff here. I really can't wait to see more. I can't wait to see if he's a rock human or not. I can't wait to see, you know, his full design of the enemy stand user. But yeah, so that's a question for the next chapter that will hopefully get answered. Be great. You know, obviously next month is the release of Volume 2. So we'll be getting a new cover art, which should be really cool. Hopefully we'll also get a name for the cat stands. But this was a really good chapter. I think this was really fun. I really enjoyed it. Can't wait for the next chapter. I'll do my review for it like normal. So until then, I shall see you all later. Thank you and goodbye.
We await your return, warrior.